All right, we have made it to our last major innovation in plants, flowers and fruits. And we find flowers and fruits only in one lineage of plants, and that is the Angiosperms. So this lineage right here, Angiosperms, these are the only ones that produce flowers and fruits. Remember, gymno means naked, so naked seed is what gymnosperm means. Angio means, we can think of that as meaning covered. And what are we covering? We're covering the seed. What are we covering it with? You're covering it with a fruit. Okay? So, flowers and fruits, huge deal, big deal. Okay? Angiosperms dominate most ecosystems. Most of the plants on our planet are angiosperms. Okay? There are more species of angiosperms than the rest of the animals put together. Okay? They're really our masters, the angiosperms. All the food that we eat, angiosperms. At least plant-based food. But all the food that are, if you eat meat, all the food that meat is eating, those animals are eating, also angiosperms. Okay? So we are highly dependent on angiosperms. They are ruling our planet. We should bow down to our angiosperm overlords, right? Okay, so the key innovations here. They use flowers. Okay, what are flowers? Flowers are basically specialized reproductive structures, and they come in a wide variety of shapes. So angiosperms only evolved after animals figured out their way onto land. So angiosperms usually rely on animals to help them move their pollen, that male gamete, from plant to plant. So, a lot of angiosperms have really unique flower structures based on the type of pollinators that they rely on. Okay? Orchids are famous. Orchids have really unique relationships with their pollinators, and they're usually highly specific. Okay? So, flower shape, flower color, flower scent, flower time that it's open, flower location on the plant can all tell us a little bit about what type of pollinator that angiosperm is using. But not all angiosperms use animals to pollinate, to move their pollen from flower to flower. A lot of angiosperms still use wind. Okay, so this right here is some flowers of grass. Like, wait, grass has flowers? Yeah, they're just not showy because they're using wind, right? So they don't rely on attracting an insect or catching the eye of something that's going by. They're just putting their gametes out on the wind, putting their pollen out on the wind, just like a conifer, and then moving around. So it'd be a waste of energy for this grass to create a nice showy flower because it doesn't need it, right? It's not necessary for its reproduction. But what's going on in a flower? Okay. Some flowers might have just male gametes, some might have just female gametes, some have both. Flowers come in all shapes and sizes, all variations that are out there. Some only have male gametes before they have female gametes, or vice versa. Okay, so they might have, part of the time they'll be male, part of the time they'll be female, and they'll switch between them. So flowers do it all the ways. But here's kind of a generalized, basic, generic flower. Okay, we divide up the structures of the flower into the male producing structures and the female gamete producing structures. So we call the female producing structures all together, all of the structures together, we call them a carpel or a pistil. Those two terms are interchangeable. Carpel, pistil, they're referring to the same thing. And really what this is, stigma-style ovary and then the ovules are all part of the carpel. They're all the female producing gamete structures. So here we have the stigma where the pollen will land. It's sticky. The style connects the stigma to the ovary and the ovules. Ovules contain the eggs. And then the ovary tissue is what contains the ovules, protects the ovules. The ovary tissue, after pollination, will become the flesh of the fruit, usually. So the ovules will become the seeds, will contain the embryo, and then the seed, the nutritive source for that sporophyte embryo. And the ovary in angiosperms becomes the fruit. Okay. So this is the female reproductive structure. The stigma, style, ovary, and then the ovule. The male reproductive structure, we call it the stamen. Okay, this produces the pollen. So here we have the anther. Okay, so this is where we're going to find the gametophyte stage. It's going to be in the anther for the male structures. The gametophyte stage for this is going to be contained inside the ovule. Okay, so they're highly reduced, just like we've seen before. So anther produces pollen, and that's sometimes held up by a filament, held up there so that way pollinators can come by, and when they land in the flower to get nectar, they'll also grab some pollen, right? Sometimes there's petals, sometimes there's not petals. Sometimes they'll use leaves instead of petals, right? But the idea is they usually will have some sort of advertisement telling their pollinators, hey, come here, this is where the nectar is, this is where the pollen is, come grab some nectar and get some pollen on your way. Okay. So that's the basic structure of a flower. Again, most flowers don't follow this basic generic plan, right? They're going to have a wide variety of different adaptations, different structures, different ways of doing this that are all unique, but this basic plan of using pollinators and attracting in their animal friends is what has made angiosperms so dominant and so effective. So that flower, combined with the fact that this ovary turns into a fruit, they just go crazy and take over the world. Okay, so the fruit is what is surrounding the seed. Okay, so here in this avocado, here's our seed. So if we were to cut that open, we would find the nutritive source around the seed and then the embryo. The fruit is another layer outside of that nutritive source. So this flesh of this avocado right here is derived from the ovary tissue. Okay, so after that egg has been fertilized inside the ovule becomes the seed, and then the ovary becomes the fruit. Okay, so this is all ripened ovary tissue. It's usually covered in a nice protective layer as well. Okay, ovary tissue, ovule, and seed and embryo are here. Fruits can be either fleshy or dry, and there's a fruits are incredibly diverse. If you go on and take some plant sciences or some botany classes, it's a whole thing learning how to classify different fruits based on where their different structures are derived from the flower. But we'll just focus on either fleshy or dry here. So this would be like a fleshy fruit. This would be a dry fruit, right? So this is the ovule. Okay. The shell of the walnut then would be the ovary. Okay. But what's the purpose of the fruit? Why spend? That's a lot of energy. Think about an avocado, right? Granted, we've selected for avocados that are larger and have more flesh to their fruit, but that's a huge expense. That's a lot of fat. That's a lot of protein. That's a lot of water that goes into making that avocado. Why? What's the purpose of it? Why do plants make fruits? Why do they make apples? Why do they make grapes? What's the purpose of these fruits in an evolutionary sense? Their main purpose is to attract an animal to come over, eat that fruit, ideally eat it whole, so that way it eats the seed as well. Guess what comes out the other side? Animal moves, animal walks around, deposits that seed somewhere else. So the flesh of the fruit is usually there, especially if it's a fleshy fruit like this. It's usually there as a bribe for an animal to come along, eat it, and then leave the seed elsewhere. So the seed is usually covered in a coat that is protective, that can survive the digestive tract of an animal. So flowers, to increase the efficiency of reproduction, so in most angiosperms, instead of just sending all of their pollen out on the wind, they now use a delivery messenger service of pollinators to move from one flower to another. Much more effective. And now these fruits are really effective at helping them spread their offspring out. Okay? Help their offspring survive and move away from the parent to go off on their own and create their own new life away from the parent. But they're usually using animals. Okay, so angiosperms exploded onto the scene after the first animals moved onto the scene. After the first animals moved onto land, and those first animals were arthropods, insects.